Good morning and welcome, everybody. Yeah, that works. I have an unusual request as we begin this service. If you've been following along with my life over the last 6 months, you will know that I've been working on this oral history project and that today's service is a part of that. Now, that serves several different functions. Both it serves this congregation, it serves my academic degree, and it also is hopefully a model for the rest of the denomination. So what we're going to do is put a QR code up right above me. Is it up there? Yes, great. Okay. So while I don't ask this often, please take out your cell phones. And if you can, use this QR code. It brings you to a pre-worship survey. It is about 4 questions long, asking about your relationship to this congregation. You may need to move into the center for this. I apologize that this is an experiment. All right. And if you cannot get it, don't worry about it. There are lots of people who are participating. Oh, that'll probably help, won't it? Yeah.
If we've already participated out front, we don't need to do this.
No, I actually am going to ask that you do this whether or not you participated in the project, because this is about this service. And it will work online. All right, here's what we're going to do. We're going to move forward with the service. If you can access it, that's great. If you are unable to, that's okay. So long as about 10 people do it, they'll still consider it good for a doctor of ministry. All right. So we'll begin this morning with music. I'm so happy that Elizabeth was available and willing to play for this particular service. So let us begin. If we will have the wisdom to survive, the poet Wendell Berry writes, to stand like slow-growing trees on a ruined place, renewing, enriching it, if we will make our seasons welcome here, asking not too much of earth or heaven, then a long time after we are dead, the lives our lives prepare will live here. Their houses strongly placed upon the valley sides, fields and gardens rich in the windows. The river will run clear, and we will never know it. And over it, bird song like a canopy on the levels of the hills. The hills will be green meadows, stock bells in noon shade. On the steeps where greed and ignorance cut down the old forest, an old forest will stand. Its rich leaf fall drifting on its roots. The veins of forgotten springs will have opened. Families will be singing in the fields. In their voices, they will hear a music risen out of the ground. They will take nothing from the ground. They will not return, whatever the grief at parting. Memory native to this valley will spread over it like a grove, and memory will grow into legend, legend into song, song into sacrament. The abundance of this place, the songs of its people and its birds will be health and wisdom and indwelling light. This is no paradisical dream. Its hardship is its possibility. So welcome to the Unitarian Church of Lincoln on this Sunday morning. My name is the Reverend Oscar Sinclair. I am not joined by our worship associate. I am flying solo this morning. The last few years have been complicated ones for this congregation. The way we join together has often changed. What we talk about has changed. How we engage with the world around us has changed. One thing that has not changed is the commitment that is at the heart of this community, that we are, first and foremost, a loving community, and that in that loving we transform ourselves and each other. We also unite reason with spiritual exploration, and I forgot that one this morning. So whoever you are, wherever you came from, if this is your first time here, you're going to hear a lot of voices this morning that you don't recognize. If this is your 500th time here, you will hear a lot of voices this morning who you do recognize and some that you don't. It is good to be together. It is good to join both here in person and on the live stream. Thank you for your presence, and let us sing together. If you would, rise in body or in spirit and join in singing our opening hymn, which is 1012 in the Teal hymnal, When I Am Frightened.
Peace.
anyone would like to come forward for the story, you're welcome to do so now. I lost my voice earlier in the week. If you're noticing, there's a bit of a change there. Doing all right. I'll squeak through. Our story today is called Bear Has a Story to Tell. It was almost winter, and Bear was getting sleepy. But first, Bear had a story to tell. Mouse, would you like to hear a story? Asked Bear with a yawn. I'm sorry, Bear, said Mouse, but it's almost winter and I have many seeds to gather. Bear helped Mouse find seeds on the forest floor. When they had finished, Mouse said, "See you soon," and tunneled underground to wait for spring. Bear took slow, sleepy steps through the forest. Fallen leaves crunched under his feet. "Hello, Duck," said Bear, sitting down to rest his tired legs. "Would you like to hear a story?" "I'm sorry, Bear," said Duck, "but it's almost winter and I'm getting ready to fly south." "All right, I'll miss you, Duck," said Bear. He raised a paw to check the direction of the wind. "I'll miss you too," said Duck, and off he flew. The sun was heavy and hung low in the sky. Bear's eyelids were getting heavy too. He counted colors to stay awake. 3 pink clouds, 2 red leaves, 1 green. "Frog, hello," said Bear. Would you like to hear a story?" "I'm sorry, Bear," said Frog, "but it's almost winter and I have to find a warm place to sleep." Bear dug a frog-sized hole between 2 evergreens, and then he tucked Frog in under a blanket of leaves and pine needles. "Thank you, Bear," said Frog. "I'll see you in the spring." Bear leaned against the old oak tree. He stretched and yawned and scratched at his belly. "I wonder if Mole is awake," he thought. "Mole, are you there, Mole?" But Mole was already asleep. "Good night, Mole," said Bear with a sigh. Many months passed and the sun returned. It melted the snow and woke the trees. Bear rolled out onto the green grass. "It's spring," he said. "Now I can tell my story." But first Bear brought Mouse an acorn. "Thank you, Bear," said Mouse. Mouse was hungry after a long winter. "Welcome home, Duck," called Bear. "You must be very tired from your journey." Bear showed Duck a shady mud puddle he'd found. Bear placed Frog in the sunshine till he was warm and awake. Frog opened one eye and then another. "Good morning," said Bear. Bear, Mouse, Duck, and Frog waited all day for Mole to wake up. And finally, Mole poked his nose out into the moonlight. "Mole," said Bear, "would you like to hear a story?" Bear gathered his friends. He sat up straight and cleared his throat. He puffed out his chest. And with all of his friends listening, Bear could not remember his story. "Oh, it was such a good story," he said, hanging his head. "But winter is a very long time for a bear to remember." Then Mouse said, "Maybe your story's about a bear." And Duck said, "Maybe your story's about the busy time just before winter." "I think there should be other characters too," suggested Frog. "Like a mole," said Mole, "and a mouse, and a duck, and a frog." Bear sat straight up again. He cleared his throat and puffed out his chest and began his story with, "It was almost winter, and Bear was getting sleepy." And that is the end of our story. We are short an assistant today in Sunday school with our 2nd through 5th grade class. If anyone is available and be willing to help assist our classroom, we'd sure appreciate it. As our children head back to our classes, I invite you to join in singing hymn number 18. That'll be in your gray hymnal. What wondrous love is this?
We set aside time each Sunday to share with each other the joys and sorrows in our lives. Being in community makes sorrow easier to bear. That is the first duty of a religious community, but it also makes joy easier to celebrate. So as we are gathered this morning, if you would speak into this shared silence or type into the chat the name of somebody that you are holding in sorrow this morning. Sandra Zieg, whose son Mark died. I'm so sorry. On November 4th. Fred. Idona. The family of Jan Braun. Brad Stewart. Orly Ferguson. Sorrow for Jenny Radcliffe and for Dana and Craig. A sorrow for Tristan and his father from Lori. Sorrow is not the beginning or the end of the story. What are names that we are holding in joy this morning? Sheila and Orvis are celebrating their 56th wedding anniversary today. It is an auspicious day. It is also Earl Kramer's 82nd birthday. And Wendy Hesterman's birthday.
I'm celebrating my 84th this week.
And Sandra's 84th birthday. this week. Mandy's brother-in-law's 50th today.
I'm celebrating a year of continuous sobriety this weekend.
A year of sobriety this weekend. Congratulations.
My aunt and uncle celebrated their 50th anniversary.
An aunt and uncle who survived? Was that the word? Who celebrated their 50th anniversary. That's better. Another joy from Mary Summermeyer, great-grandson Spencer, born Wednesday, is doing well in the NICU. Joys in the live chat. A joy from Michael Reinmiller. My joy is completion of some classes at Southeast Community College for entrepreneurship. Joy of Betsy Shipley providing a beautiful pulpit decoration this morning. From Jamie Radcliffe, getting to meet old friends Nathan and Taryn this afternoon. From Jerry Cotter for son Matt and daughter-in-law Tina on the birth of their son Desmond Robert. From Shelley Fowler, joy, vacation week in Columbus with my folks. From Lori, joy for all those who helped with the procurement of a new kiln. That is exciting. Ask Lori about that sometime. Other joys. Lynn's cat is recovering from a mystery illness. So for all of these things, joys, sorrows, and stuff in between that we can't quite say yet, let's hold a moment of silence together. Would you please stay seated, but join me in singing our next hymn, number 352, Find a Stillness. Just as we gather on Sunday recognizing that we are not alone in this community, so too is this community not alone in the broader Lincoln community. Once a month, we take up a collection and we send all of the proceeds to one of our partner organizations in the community as part of our Share the Plate program. Our Share the Plate partner this month is Fresh Start. It's also an ongoing relationship. We've had a relationship with Fresh Start since well before I got here. And I often see their board meeting here in our building every month. So I'll get out of the way and welcome Monica Zenke to say a little bit more about the work that they are doing.
Good morning, everyone. It's really nice to be back. I've only been here a couple times in the last few years, so I appreciate coming back. This space means a lot to me personally, as well as for Fresh Start. Fresh Start has had a relationship with members of this church since our beginning 31 years ago. So yes, a very, very long and deep relationship. And that's the first thing I always want to thank you all for. I really appreciate coming here in November too, because this month means a lot to me in gratitude, and this congregation is part of that we have for Fresh Start. So in case you're not familiar with us, Fresh Start is a transitional program for women experiencing homelessness, and they can come to our program and stay for up to a year. We've actually extended that some during the pandemic because of the additional challenges that the women have faced. And they can be homeless for any reason. So we have a lot of people coming to us out of treatment for mental health and for substance abuse and looking for that safe place to start their sober journey. That's a lot of who we serve, but physical health, mental health, domestic violence, job loss, or just not earning enough, any reason of homelessness, they can come to Fresh Start and stay for up to a year. And we have case managers that are there 24 hours a day, staff that's there 24 hours a day to help them get connected to resources, to hold them accountable to the goals they're setting, to be the cheerleaders for those goals, and anything else that they need. And the support that we get from members of this church is how we're able to do all of that, both from board members that are on our congregation, from some of you that come and volunteer, from some of you that do the Sunday night suppers, from some of you that donate needed items. There's so many ways that we are connected to this congregation, and so thank you very much for that. A couple things today have struck me. Both the first song that we sang, I feel like maybe that's what our residents are saying when they're coming in is, can you see me? Can you help me? I'm frightened. Can you love me? And then that Fresh Start is not the beginning or end of their story either. Just like joys and sorrows that brought them to Fresh Start and that we talked about, Fresh Start is the intermediate part of their story. We're not the beginning or the end. We're just hoping that we are a step for them and that we are part of their story moving on in a much more positive way. So thank you very much for inviting us. Today is the start of National Hunger and Homeless Awareness Week as well, so it's a timely moment for me to come and speak today. So thank you very much. If anybody's interested in more information about how to be involved with those volunteer opportunities or on our board of directors or anything else, you can find me after the service. So thank you.
So as Elizabeth plays the next song, the ushers will come forward and pass a plate. And as they do that, a reminder that all donations in the plate, unless they're marked otherwise, will go to Fresh Start today. You can also donate by texting UC Lincoln and the amount you wish to give to 73256. If you do it that way, I believe in the drop-down box you select Share the Plate for it to go to Fresh Start. The offering will now be gratefully received. I've been thinking a lot about history this year. What legacy we leave for those that come after us. This congregation called me, many of you in this room, called me almost 6 years ago. And when I started here in the summer of 2017, it was a hopeful moment. The congregation had just had an influx of new members right after the 2016 election. There are lots of ways to think about hopeful moments. You were back in this newly renovated building. And you called a young minister, raring to go after 2 years as a junior member on the staff team of a large congregation in Long Island. This was a church poised to take a leap forward, to grow in members and influence in the city, and that is the mandate that you handed that young minister. Help us make the Unitarian Church of Lincoln to be a beacon. Let us grow this community together. Your healthy ambition to make a mark will feed ours, and vice versa. Five years and 6 months later, this congregation has fewer members than the day I started. We launched a second service in January of 2020, after realizing that this sanctuary had been at capacity for decades. We're now at one service, with about 2/3 as many people here in person on Sunday morning as we had 3 years ago. We just sent out a letter to our members. I got mine yesterday, laying out the budget situation for 2023. A shortfall in our pledge income means staff cuts are a very real possibility this year. Now, some things have changed. I'm going to pause for a second. AV, you can actually put the camera on me. The audio will still come through. Some things have changed in positive ways. My first sermon here in August of 2017, my very first sermon from this pulpit after I had been called, was about the proposed eighth principle committing Unitarian Universalism to the work of anti-racism. Our beloved Conversations team is bringing that work to the congregation this spring in 2023. Sometimes work takes a long time, but it is worth doing. Before I came here, I was involved in congregation-based community organizing, and I remember a meeting that I had in June of 2017 where I talked with some of the national folks at the Gamaliel organization that I had been a part of and said, I'm moving to Nebraska. Would you be willing to expand out to Nebraska with me? And they said, no. You're moving to Nebraska. It's 2017. We're playing defense everywhere. Of course, we're not going to expand to a new state. Well, on Thursday night of this week, the Unitarian Church of Lincoln became a charter member of Justice in Action, a network of 22 faith communities in Lancaster County, organizing to bring meaningful change to our city. Brackets. This is what we've been calling DART. It now has a name. It is going to be Justice in Action for the next 30 years. Judy Hart is on the initial board. So it's been a mixed bag these last half dozen years. And hanging over all of it is the COVID-19 pandemic. Since March of 2020, it's been the dominant force in our congregation, determining how and when we worship together, the stresses on us as individuals, and the climate our church exists in. It is the dividing line between the optimistic first years of my ministry in Lincoln and the disorientation of the last several years. And as I've been trying to make sense of where we have ended up collectively, how we ended with that letter that we sent out this week. Not ended, but how we got to that letter that we sent out this week. This is the question that I keep coming back to. What happened to us during the pandemic? Not as a rhetorical question or one that can be answered in generalities, but what happened to each of us in these 3 years? How did we end up here? So over the last 3 months, we've tried to answer that question. 91 friends and members of this congregation have interviewed each other on tape about the pandemic. We've generated almost 20 hours of audio and over 400 pages of transcripts. Here's a snapshot of some of the vignettes we've captured in that process.
What do you remember about
I get more tired more easily.
What do you remember about when we first heard about COVID?
I remember you were kind of freaking out.
It's so hard to just one image, but one image is I remember President Trump saying that it would be over by Easter.
I saw the MRI on TV of the lung that was affected, and it showed all the tissue where the carbon dioxide and the oxygen exchange in the lungs. I just said, this is bad.
Also images of all the signs in my neighborhood, because it was it was kind of like living, like we will make it through this. There were signs like that. There was somebody in my neighborhood who had a sign that was counting the number of people who had COVID and had died. And so I think those sort of images will stick in my mind.
Yeah. For me, it was the pictures of on, I believe it was CNN. They were showing the nurses that were in the ICU units desperately trying to care for these patients, and they had these grooves that were almost bleeding in their faces because they were masking, double masking. They were gowned. It was exhausting work, and they were trying everything they could, but it left them drained. And the pictures of there's one where it's a nurse standing in a hallway. She's bent over with her hands on her knees. Her face is all chewed up from the mask, and you can just tell she has nothing left. She's drained.
We had it relatively easy, and even with the relative ease, it felt at times like I was just failing.
We took pictures of the spider playing the piano and a rhinoceros lighting the chalice.
Kelly Ross had printouts of sheets of paper of how do you get on Zoom, and she had done screenshots and circled in red.
We traded a butternut squash for 2 rolls of toilet paper.
It's just flashes of different images. Sean talking about Mount Sinai set up
I get more.
What do you remember about when we first heard about COVID?
On to the next one. So the last voice that you would have heard on that are 2 voices, one saying that the pandemic in a very real way put the question front and center, is this worth dying for? And then the last voice, I never thought I'd feel heroic as a DoorDash delivery person. But there were a few weeks in there where the kids were chalking on the sidewalk, thank you for delivering. So this morning we're going to listen to some of those stories. And as a reminder, 91 of you participated. So not every voice is going to be in this particular service, or we would be here for a very long time. But this is also not the last time that we'll draw on this resource. So why do this? First, because I have to. One of my pandemic projects was to start and apparently finish a doctoral program, and collecting these stories was part of my thesis. It's right to be honest about that. Second, because in collecting these stories, we serve the congregation's history. During the pandemic, we celebrated this place's 150th anniversary as an institution. This is a way to record and answer the question for those who come after: what happened during the pandemic years at the Unitarian Church of Lincoln? But third, and most importantly, listening to stories helps us to heal and to move forward. So the healing is not intuitive, admittedly, because to heal, you first need to see a wound. And that's not obvious in this moment. Remember, I've spent 2 months listening to 92 of you on earphones for hour after hour after hour. 92 of you describing what you struggled with from the pandemic, and I didn't struggle much, or others struggled more than I did. We're a plurality of the answers. But listen to what else people said.
I go out and do, some errands, and normally I'd be able to do that and do other things as well. And I come home sometimes and I'm just tired from doing what doesn't seem like a lot. And I'm not sure what that stems from exactly.
I'm the same way.
I sort of want to say confused, but not really confused. Maybe just kind of lethargic.
It just was more. It was just more. It just always felt like more than I could even wrap my mind around.
Isn't that funny? I actually forgot it in my mind because I have put it so far behind me because it hurt so much to have to end it that I couldn't even remember that until just now.
I redecorated my office almost as soon as we came back into the building. I got rid of all the furniture that had been in there, rearranged where everything was. And it was only recently that I put together that almost as soon as I came back into that office down there, it's like I can't.
2.5 years later.
Right. I need different chairs in here. I need the desk in a different place. And I hadn't put together that one of my last experiences with it, set up with the red chairs in a circle, was this incredibly sad,
Scary.
intense, frightening moment. Trauma is a word that gets thrown around a lot in 2022. But it is also an academic term, capturing a certain kind of experience and a certain kind of symptoms. So here's a definition that I've been working with from Fisher and Rydesser, translated by Ruth Poser. You write that trauma is the experience of a fundamental discrepancy between a threatening situation and an individual's possibilities for overcoming it. This experience is accompanied by feelings of helplessness, defenselessness, and abandonment, and can permanently disrupt the person's understanding of self and the world. So the lived experience of the COVID-19 pandemic incorporates all the elements of that definition. Many members who participated in this project highlighted the discrepancy in scale between the worldwide threat and the relatively uncertain, mundane responses to them. From stocking up on toilet paper to sewing masks while hundreds of thousands of people were getting sick. And in the aftermath, many of us articulate a disrupted sense of self, abandonment, and defenselessness expressed through fatigue. So I think that it's possible to understand this experience as traumatic, at least to a group of our members. But one of the really striking things about the last 3 years is that while it was universal in its impact, COVID-19 affected all of us in one way or another, it was deeply personal in how it affected us. We ran a survey of folks who participated in the interview portion, and one of the questions that we asked was, how were you affected by the pandemic? With 1 being very negatively and 5 being very positively. That should be above me right now. You can see it's a bell curve. A lot of people were right in the middle. They said it didn't really affect me positively or negatively, or they said in follow-ups, some things were positive, some things were negative. Most people answered 2, that it affected them somewhat negatively. Some people said it was very, very negative. And for some people in this congregation, COVID-19 was a positive experience. That is a remarkable arc. And the biggest, if you take away nothing else from anything that I'm saying this morning, it's that I want those groups to hear each other. So let's hear some of those experiences.
Honestly, it's probably something akin to survivor's guilt, because my life got easier during the whole thing.
I lost 10 events in that space of 3 years. And so it feels like I was forced to retire.
I will always look back on this as like the best 3 years of my life. Yeah, so I know it was, I sometimes sort of feel guilty that I know this has been a really hard time for some people, but for me it was sort of a blessing, because right when my parents needed my attention, I could give it to them 100%.
That's incredible.
And so the fact that, the fact that they couldn't go out much, well, we didn't need to. So it was sort of a blessing.
I was certain I was going to die. I did not think I was going to live through the pandemic. I have asthma. And I thought, well, I'm going to die. I'll just see how long I can hold on. And that was my pervasive thought right at first. Then I got better.
It took me a while to really realize that as serious as it was, because like I said, living out in the country and not being around people all the time, and being retired and not having to go into a job, it didn't really seem different than any other time of life until the place I go exercise stopped when I couldn't go there.
It was probably the most loneliest part of my life. It's worse than being in jail, and I know that. But it was, or has been, a struggle for me. I like to be around people, and the lack of people around me was depressing.
I was at home all the time. I got to be in my crab cave the whole time. So as long as I was in my little bubble, everything was okay. I got to be with my pets. I got to have new surroundings. I got to wear fun jammy pants to work. It was, as long as I was inside, it was okay. It was just when I had to go outside and do things like get groceries for my dad, where it was kind of heart palpitating, kind of nerve-wracking, scary.
It's the creation of the chasm, the expansion of the chasm, that ultimately not forced, but encouraged me to learn about myself and to get started on the path and to get moving, so that I had, any motivation at all. Because I think without the pandemic, I would be a much more boring, much more stagnant person right now.
A happy time was when Craig and I legally married. And my 2 oldest children died of COVID-19 at the beginning of the pandemic. And so for me, the last 3 years have been just tsunamis of emotion. Huge waves of grief, sorrow, resentment, anger come rushing over me and nearly drown me. And then they recede. And it was a time of change when the pestilence raged the land and we were in seclusion. I truly felt like a prisoner. It's a nice prison, but still it was a prison. Could not get out, could not attend my children's funerals. And there is something basically wrong about your children preceding you in death. I mean, when your parents die, you become an orphan regardless of your age. If your spouse dies, you're a widow or a widower. And if your children die, you're just devastated.
Like, I wasn't happy, but I was okay. But it was just like, I didn't really look at myself and stuff, but COVID forced me to like look inward and actually focus on myself as opposed to just doing school, just doing work, and just putting all of myself into those things and stuff. I still do that, but like now I also let myself think about me and what I am and who I am and stuff. So it's really weird because everybody was always like, COVID was so hard and is so hard, and like so many people died and there's that trauma from it, but at the same time, like, I became happier during COVID, which is weird to admit to people, and I hate that idea because people lost their loved ones and entire families have died. But like, I've been blessed in which growth, like, I became happier and I grew as a person, and I'm a lot more confident in myself and a lot happier where I am. I'm not just okay anymore, and I am no longer willing to be just okay.
So the range of effects on this community is vast. We have members who describe the pandemic years as the best of their lives, and others who were crushed by its effects. There's been a lot written about trauma and healing over the last several decades. We have a language around individual trauma, as imperfect as it is. But there's another component of it that is less studied and understood, and that is the effect of trauma on a community. In 1973, a mudslide destroyed the town of Buffalo Creek, West Virginia. It destroyed about half the homes in the town. And in the aftermath, the sociologist Kai Erikson was hired to interview residents of Buffalo Creek as part of a lawsuit related to the disaster. And in his interviews, Erikson started to recognize that it wasn't just the people whose houses had been washed away that were affected. It was the systems that they lived in. Right? A bowling league where half of its members lost their home was likely exhibiting collective signs of trauma, collective symptoms that looked a lot like a traumatic response. So Erikson coined the term communal trauma, recognizing that in natural disasters, it's not just individuals, but systems, communities that need to heal. Judith Herman writes that in healing from trauma, remembering and telling the truth about terrible events are prerequisites for the restoration of the social order and for the healing of individual victims. Jeffrey Alexander, writing about communal trauma, writes that there are several things that a community has to establish. These three are the nature of the victim, the nature of the pain, and the relationship between the victims and the broader community. And I should say implicitly here, I think that part of how we've ended up here, to go back to the beginning of this sermon, is that our system is expressing a collective trauma response. Even though a third of our folks said it didn't affect me or it affected me positively. We were like that bowling league where half of the houses were washed away. So the path forward is three things. First, the nature of the victim. Who was affected? Who in our community was affected? So let's listen to some of that. We had a set of bad options. You could either choose to come back into the building, in which case you'd be
Maybe
at greater
increasing risk.
For everybody, or you could keep everybody out of the building, in which case you'd be really continuing to wound these folks who were expressing deep isolation. And so it felt like whatever we did, we were going to fall short of what we say we're about.
Opportunities to be with family at critical junctures and stuff were so constrained and risky and stuff, and so I found ways to do it. I found way to go down and quarantine in his basement, because he has a big house and they have a special circulatory system in their house, so I felt like it was pretty safe to do it. But I took a hot plate and a bunch of groceries.
The first time that I saw my grandson, after not seeing him for, weeks or months or whatever it was, and I decided, well, I could go be with him outside. And he was so excited to see me. And then he didn't want me to leave. But Grammy, I need you. Don't leave,
Aww.
Anyway, yeah. That.
It's a big deal.
I mean, there's a story to our pandemic which is at a point when everybody else was suddenly in much better shape. When I had been vaccinated, in fact, when I had been vaccinated twice, because I lied about having been vaccinated with J&J and got a Pfizer too. When case rates were way down, when we'd never heard the name Omicron, Wendy got vaccinated and had a huge relapse as a consequence. And that huge relapse has extended. I mean, she is now, still not back to where she was in May of 2021.
I worked at a plasma center, and so we just worked anyways. We were considered, even during the lockdown, we were considered essential. Essential. Thank you. Yes, I have the badge of essential worker.
I suppose the danger of becoming a carrier, I guess, and spreading it to the vulnerable population I work with is probably my biggest stressor.
With my health and hearing that this new virus was coming through, I spent a lot of time thinking I was going to die. And just sort of being very, very, very afraid.
I'm a social person. I like to be around people. I like to get to know people. So having that not there anymore for a significant part of the time, that was hard for me.
The range of people who were affected varied, from grandparents to folks with chronic conditions to extroverts, church staff, people trying to visit aging families. What was the nature of the pain that they experienced?
We got the call from my daughter, and she said, I just think, we didn't say cancel, we said postpone. Because I remember telling the girls, it'll be, their mom telling them, we'll celebrate maybe your next half birthday. And it was, 2.5 years before we did. But I have no idea why I get emotional about this.
recap. I had a good friend who actually died, and I was with her in April of 2021. We went on a trip together during this little window of possibility, and I asked her if she was vaccinated, and she said no. And I said, why? She was actually my navigator, my Medicare navigator, and a theater friend. And she said, well, I have lung issues. And I thought, isn't that the reason why you would get vaccinated? Anyway, life went on, and in November, I saw it on Facebook is how I heard about it. And then she was gone. So it was like, where do you even put that kind of information?
Right.
So, and she wasn't a family member, but a good friend. But people who lost family members, I just can't imagine what they do with that hurt.
Later on, when the coffee hour was less attended and people were finding other ways or moving on, I was afraid that this church would kind of wither away, and that my place in the community here would go with it. That this place might not exist. Because it was so important to me, is still important to me, but I felt a growing alienation, detachment detachment is more accurate. Not feeling like I was so used to spending time here in this building, and the building looked empty and foreign to me. And had most of my friends are right here, part of this community. Most of my friends are part of this community, or come from this community. And I don't think I've lost them. It's just I haven't seen them in a long time, and we may not be in the same relationship when we come back to something more like full participation in this church.
No more yoga classes, no more NIA classes, no more in-person committee meetings, no more parties. We could no longer play cards with our friends. We could no longer go out to restaurants and have dinner with our friends. And those were things that both Ed and I really enjoyed doing, and especially Ed. He liked being with people, and those were his major outlets. So it made just the isolation, I think, was really hard.
But the loneliness was just vast. It was absolutely just so hard. So hard.
So I know we're a little past 11. There are about 3 minutes left here. The third part of healing as a community, after we've talked about the nature of the victim and the nature of the pain, who was hurt and how, is the relationship between the victims and the broader community. Because there's this thing that happens in trauma, right? Those folks had such a hard time. I feel bad for them and say, there, but for the grace of God go I. The challenge of understanding communal trauma, though, is seeing that it isn't them. It's us. All those voices that you've been hearing, that's all of us. Those are all people in this community. They mostly recorded them right out there on Sunday mornings. And even if we ourselves aren't affected in a particular way, we are tied up in relationship with each other. I say that almost every Sunday from this pulpit. Preach this every month at church. We are interconnected in community. So this whole thing, this whole oral history project, every email I've sent, every person I have pestered in coffee hour, is at its most basic an attempt at collective compassion. What happened to us? All of this. What comes next? There's a lot that I don't know. I don't know how the pledging shortfall is going to resolve in the next few weeks. I don't know how, whether, or how fast this church will grow after COVID. I don't know how to heal some of my own personal wounds from this time, other than knowing that I'm about to take a very well-timed sabbatical. But I do know that these stories matter. All of them. Not just the 20 minutes that were in this sermon. A whole 400 pages of it. If you go out in the gallery, there's a binder on the old altar. It has 400 pages of transcripts. And we'll keep it, StoryCorps style, in the church archives. We'll keep it out there for the next month or two. Go out and look through it. Because we'll keep drawing on these stories. Next time in a service on January 1st about what we've learned during the pandemic. And I know this congregation will continue to be a special, special community, one that I'm proud to be a part of. So one last set of stories.
My instinct was to float away like a balloon from the whole world. Like, forget it, I'll just go. Bye-bye, world. You know, like, I'll just be in my bubble. I don't know, I'm mixing metaphors. But the UU did keep me kind of grounded. Chelsea kept saying, no, come back, Jake. Come back, close the ears. And so it did serve that role.
But I did really like the Zoom and the YouTube and the contact we did have with the church. That really did help.
Coming back in person and seeing everybody, I think I just like cried through the whole service because it was just so sweet to be back among people that I don't really know that well, or that but it would just, I realized that like, oh, I had missed this, and we are back together, and that's really powerful.
I think it really deepened my spirituality, like going through the pandemic and like suffering through that.
I had at least twice, sometimes 3 times a week, there'd be church service by Zoom, there'd be my UU Connects group, there'd be my Open Circle group. And sometimes right before the meeting, I'd think, oh, I don't really have anything to say, and I'm not in 100% feeling happy and chipper. Maybe I shouldn't inflict my bad mood on people. But then I'd go, and it was such a good antidote to just being in my own headspace. So,
because it was something I could count on. It's people I love, people I know.
I just marvel at how well our church has adjusted to all this change, and how people have stepped up and made adjustments. It's just been remarkable.
Yeah. One last request. As Elizabeth plays this last piece of music, please take out your cell phones, point it at the QR code above me. I'll put the link in the live chat again, and take this last survey. This is the part that helps academically, but it also helps because this spring I'm bringing the same project to 2 other congregations, because I think this is a model that can help our movement right now. And this will help us do that better. Thank you, and amen.